He found a baby in a dumpster and raised him as his own. 3 years later, the child's birth mother appeared with a truth that would shake everything he believed about love, family, and fate. What started as an act of compassion turned into a life-changing journey none of them could have predicted. Will love be enough to hold them together? Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories like this one. They say success changes people, but I think loneliness changes them more. I was 40 years old, standing at the top of a high-rise in downtown Chicago, watching the city lights flicker like scattered stars, and all I could think about was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet, the kind that wraps around you like a cold fog. I had it all. The luxury penthouse, the titanium watch that cost more than some people's homes, and a net worth that kept my face in magazines I never bothered to read. My name is Ethan Maddox, and before that night, I believed I was untouchable. I believed I didn't need anyone. It was late. Another charity gala done. Another round of fake smiles, forced handshakes, and people thanking me for donations I only made for tax write-offs and good PR. The ballroom had been stifling. Perfume, ego, and greed hung in the air like perfume. I left early, told my driver to wait. I just needed to breathe. Needed to walk. No bodyguards, no assistants, just me and the wind off Lake Michigan. The night was cold, but clean. The kind of cold that snaps your brain out of its fog. I pulled my wool coat tighter around me and walked down an alley shortcut between two office buildings. A path I knew well from my early startup days when I used to deliver my own pitch decks by hand. Back then I wore sneakers with holes in them. Now they were Italian leather, but somehow the steps felt heavier. And that's when I heard it. A cry. Barely there. Weak. Like the wind itself was whimpering. I stopped. At first I thought maybe it was a cat or something caught in the trash. But the sound had rhythm, desperate and human. I turned slowly toward the dark, narrow space between two dumpsters, and my stomach clenched in a way I hadn't felt since I was a kid waiting for the next foster home. I hesitated. I'm not proud of it, but I did. My first instinct was to keep walking. This wasn't my problem. I didn't get to the top of the tech world by stopping for every mess on the street, but something. God, fate, guilt, I don't know, dragged my feet toward the sound. There, behind a ripped cardboard box, was a bundle of dirty gray fabric. I squatted down, heart pounding, and gently peeled back the cover. Underneath was a baby. A real breathing baby, no more than 3 months old, his skin ghostly pale, his cheeks red from the chill. His tiny eyes opened wide, locked onto mine, and he stopped crying. Just like that, as if he'd been waiting. My throat closed. I couldn't move. I just stared at him. His little hand flailed in the air, and I let him grab my index finger. The grip was weak, but determined. I didn't think. I took off my coat, wrapped him as best I could, and pulled out my phone with shaking hands. I called the driver off and hailed a cab instead. I didn't want this turning into a media circus. 15 minutes later, we were at St. Clair's Hospital, the same one that had hosted the gala an hour before. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stormed into the ER, clutching the baby like a lifeline. He was abandoned. Found him in an alley. He needs help now. The nurses didn't ask questions. They took him, called pediatricians, called CPS. I paced the waiting room like a madman. The sterile lights buzzed overhead, and I realized I was still clutching the baby's blanket in my hand. The doctor came out after what felt like hours. He's stable, just mild exposure. You got him here in time. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by dread. Now, the doctor continued, social services will need to place him in a temporary facility until a foster situation becomes available. That word, facility, stabbed into my chest like a rusty nail. I'd been in one. Many, actually. Some kind, some cruel. All temporary. I remembered the smell of old mattresses, the sound of other children crying at night. I remembered how no one looked you in the eye because they didn't want to grow attached. I couldn't let that happen. I'll take him, I heard myself say. The doctor blinked. You mean, foster him? Temporarily, I lied. Just until you find his family. There's a protocol, background checks, home studies, legal. I know the system, I snapped, and I know how to move through it. I'll start the paperwork. Just let him come with me tonight. He's not spending another night alone. They pushed back, but not for long. Money talks. influence whispers, and I had both. 2 hours later, I was back in my penthouse with a baby in my arms. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched him breathe in the bassinet I had rush-ordered from an all-night delivery service. I watched his chest rise and fall, the slight flutter of his lips. He had a tiny scar just above his left eyebrow. I wondered where he got it. Who had hurt him? Who had left him? His name tag at the hospital had said Baby Doe. I whispered softly into the silence, "Your name is Noah." I had no idea then what I had just begun. That this baby would tear down everything I'd built, my walls, my ego, my certainty, and rebuild something better in its place. I didn't know it then, but I was already his father. The morning after I found Noah, my world didn't just change, it cracked wide open. The skyline was still the same outside my window, but nothing else felt familiar. My bed remained untouched, my coffee sat cold on the counter, and every corner of my penthouse buzzed with the unsettling hum of something new. Purpose. Noah slept in a portable crib I had delivered at 3 in the morning. He was bundled in fresh baby clothes, his skin warm, his breathing steady. I sat nearby on the edge of my couch, watching him with a strange mix of awe and fear. My entire life had been spent building systems, tech companies, automated platforms, efficient structures, and here lay the most unstructured, unpredictable force I'd ever encountered. A child. By 9 a.m., the calls started. My assistant Rachel had already rescheduled my meetings, assuming I was hungover or jet-lagged. Instead, I told her calmly, "Reschedule the entire week. I've had a personal development." She hesitated. "Mr. Maddox, the investor group from Singapore." I said reschedule. I had barely hung up when Mike showed up at my door. He wasn't just my lawyer. He was my oldest friend, one of the only people who knew about my childhood in group homes and shelters. He walked in, took one look at the baby, and blinked. "What the hell is this?" I gave him the short version. The alley, the hospital, the paperwork. Mike looked from me to Noah and back like I'd gone completely off the rails. "You found a baby in a dumpster and just brought him home?" "He's not a stray dog, Mike." "I'm not saying he is. I'm saying this is insane. You know nothing about babies. You work 18 hours a day. You once forgot your own birthday." He had a point. The only bottles I knew how to handle were served in whiskey bars. I didn't know how to hold a baby without feeling like I might drop him. But none of that mattered. None of that outweighed the moment I looked into Noah's eyes and felt something snap into place. Something I didn't even know I was missing. "I've already filed for temporary guardianship," I said, "and I hired a full-time nanny. She starts this afternoon." Mike pinched the bridge of his nose. "You're serious. Dead serious." He exhaled, then dropped onto my leather armchair. "Then you'd better learn how to sterilize bottles, change diapers, and survive on no sleep." I already had a crash course from YouTube the night before. I'd watched tutorial after tutorial, how to swaddle, how to burp, how to make a bottle and test the temperature on your wrist. I'd even bookmarked blogs from single dads and downloaded a sleep schedule app I didn't yet understand. All I knew was that I wasn't sending this baby away. Not now. Not ever. That afternoon, the nanny arrived, Sophia, mid-40s, calm but firm, with the gentle authority of someone who had raised 4 kids of her own. She took one look at me and nodded like she'd seen my kind before. "You've got that look." "What look?" The "what the hell did I get myself into" look. "Don't worry. We'll survive." Noah adjusted quickly. He took the bottle. He fell asleep in my arms after crying so hard I thought I might break. Sophia showed me how to hold him against my chest, how to rub his back in circles until his little body melted into mine like we'd done this forever. And in a way, I think we had. Maybe not in this life, but something about that baby fit into my arms like he belonged there. Like I had been made for this. In the days that followed, the penthouse began to change. My pristine white sofa was soon covered with colorful throws and burp cloths. My kitchen, once a minimalist stream of black marble and brushed steel, now overflowed with drying bottles, baby wipes, and formula cans. The only noise I'd ever tolerated was ambient jazz. Now, my home echoed with lullabies, hiccups, and the occasional meltdown, his and mine. At first, my staff thought I'd gone mad. Rachel called to confirm meetings, and I told her I'd be working remotely between naps and feedings. My board members sent emails with subject lines like urgent, expansion plan. I replied with baby emojis, and postponed our Latin American strategy meetings. They didn't know it yet, but I had a new priority. Late at night, when the world was finally quiet again and Noah was curled up in my arms, I'd sit by the window, looking out at the glittering sprawl of the city. And I'd think about how strange it was that a man like me, built for logic and code, could fall so hard so fast for a tiny human who couldn't even talk yet. He changed everything. He changed me. Noah had no idea who I was, no idea what I owned or what I'd built. All he knew was the warmth of my arms and the sound of my voice, and for the first time in my life, that was enough. By the end of that week, I filed for full adoption. Mike tried to talk me out of it again. He reminded me that it wasn't just about diapers and midnight feedings. There would be legal complications, background checks, court visits. I told him I didn't care. I'd been through worse. "You're all in," he said one night after watching me rock Noah to sleep. "Yeah," I whispered. "I am." And I wasn't just talking about the paperwork. I meant every breath, every sleepless night, every small smile that flashed across that baby's face. I was in, heart, soul, and all. The first time Noah smiled at me, I was elbow deep in a diaper explosion at 3 a.m. I had no idea what I was doing. The wipes were everywhere, the baby powder was a war zone, and the poor kid looked like he was regretting being saved from that alley. But just as I was mumbling to myself and nearly attaching the diaper backward for the third time, Noah let out this tiny sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a coo. His mouth curved into a crooked, gummy grin, and those blue eyes of his lit up like he was in on some secret joke. I froze. Then I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. From that moment, we were in it together. Me, the clueless bachelor billionaire, and him, the 3-month-old miracle with a penchant for peeing at the worst possible time. Sophia, the nanny, had settled into our lives like a lifeline. She was patient with me in ways I didn't deserve, firm with Noah in ways he actually responded to, and motherly in a way that filled the apartment with a kind of softness I never knew I was missing. She called me boss, half-jokingly, even as she handed me burp cloths and taught me how to heat formula without scalding it. And I listened. I learned. Because this mattered more than board meetings and market shares. This was the real stuff. I started adjusting my schedule. At first, it was just cutting evening meetings. Then I began shifting morning calls to nap time. Eventually, I moved my entire office to the guest bedroom across from Noah's nursery. The triple monitor setup looked ridiculous next to the duck-themed wallpaper and musical mobile, but it worked. My staff didn't know what to make of it. Rachel raised an eyebrow during our weekly Zoom when I picked up Noah mid-call and kept talking through a pitch presentation while bouncing him on my knee. Mike stopped asking questions and started bringing baby books as gifts instead of whiskey. Even my executive board, those steely-eyed, suit-clad titans of finance, softened a bit when they saw the way Noah giggled on camera during one of our calls. But not everyone was convinced. Investors murmured behind closed doors. The media caught wind of the story, a tech mogul adopting a baby off the street, and speculated everything from a midlife crisis to a publicity stunt. One headline read, "Ethan Maddox, billionaire, baby whisperer, or breakdown." I didn't care. Let them write their stories. I was writing my own. And the story wasn't just about me and Noah. It was about what we were building together. One night, about 6 months in, I was holding Noah on the balcony, the city spread out beneath us like a glittering ocean. The stars above were faint. Chicago rarely gave us a clear sky, but the air was crisp and he was warm against my chest. He'd just started babbling that week, random syllables and nonsense sounds, but every time he said "da-da," something cracked open in my chest. I thought about all the kids out there who weren't as lucky. The ones who wouldn't be found in time. The ones who wouldn't get to babble at anyone. And that's when the idea hit me. The land was already mine. A sprawling property in the suburbs I'd bought years ago for a real estate investment I never followed through on. It had sat empty, waiting for a purpose. Now, it had one. I called my sister Lauren that night. She was the only other person who might understand. She picked up on the third ring. "Ethan, you okay?" "I want to build something," I said. There was a pause. "Isn't that what you've always done?" "No," I said. "Not like this. I want to build a center, a home for kids like Noah, like us." Another pause. "Then, you mean a shelter?" "More than that," a safe haven, with music, therapy, real support, not the sterile, overcrowded system we grew up in. I want to name it after him, the Noah Foundation. Lauren didn't speak for a long moment, then her voice cracked softly through the line. Tell me what you need me to do. In the weeks that followed, the plans came to life faster than I expected. I poured money into architects, contractors, educators, and social workers. Lauren agreed to run the operations, and Sophia offered to help consult on child development programs. We brought in experts to design trauma-informed classrooms and healing spaces filled with light and music. The news picked it up again, this time less cynical. From cold code to warm hearts, Maddox builds shelter in son's name. I didn't respond to interviews. I let the work speak. Back home, Noah hit milestone after milestone like a one-man parade of firsts. His first tooth, his first crawl, straight into my open laptop, destroying 3 hours of work. His first wobbly steps across the nursery rug, arms flailing, laughter erupting from his tiny lungs like fireworks. He called me Dada, clearly one morning while I was changing his shirt. I looked up, stunned. You talking to me, kid? Dada, he shouted again, this time with authority. Then he drooled all over his chin and clapped for himself. I swear I nearly cried. The Ethan Maddox who once sealed million-dollar deals without blinking was now the man who cried over 2 syllables from a toddler. And I was okay with that. At night, when Noah was asleep and the city went still, I'd sit beside his crib, watching him breathe. I no longer feared the silence. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibilities, full of love, full of a life I never knew I wanted but couldn't imagine losing. People still called me a mogul, a genius, a visionary. But when he stirred in his sleep and mumbled Dada through a dream, I knew the only title that mattered was the one I'd earned with sleepless nights, endless bottles, and a heart that finally understood what it meant to be full. Father. By the time Noah turned 1, I was no longer just playing the role of a father. I was living it. Every part of my identity had quietly shifted. I still had the title of CEO, sure, and the suit still hung neatly in my closet, but I wore them less. These days I spent more time in jeans and soft old t-shirts, ones Noah could drool on without sending my dry cleaner into cardiac arrest. I'd wake up to the sound of little feet banging the crib rails, not to conference calls. And my mornings began not with espresso and stock reports, but with applesauce and nursery rhymes. He changed me, and I welcomed it. The Noah Foundation was beginning to take shape. What started as a spontaneous idea during a late-night call had become the most meaningful project of my life. The land in Lake Forest, which once sat vacant and soulless, now buzzed with activity. Construction crews poured concrete with precision. Architects debated blueprints under morning sun. Teachers and trauma therapists joined Zoom calls to plan the curriculum. I visited the site almost every day with Noah strapped to my chest in a carrier, his tiny hand clutching the strap as if to say, "We're building this together, aren't we, Dad?" Lauren was a natural leader, sharp, driven, and warm in all the ways I wasn't. She took the lead on community outreach, working with local organizations, child welfare experts, and state agencies. She coordinated volunteers, applied for grants I didn't even know existed, and refused to let a single penny of my funding go to waste. Watching her take this mission and pour herself into it was like watching a piece of our broken past get rewritten. You realize this is going to be the largest privately funded children's care center in the Midwest, right? She told me one afternoon as we stood inside what would soon be the therapy wing. It's not just a shelter, Ethan. It's hope. It's a second chance for a lot of kids. I looked at the unfinished walls around us, bare beams echoing halls and sunlight pouring through where windows would go, and I felt something swell in my chest. Pride, maybe. But more than that, conviction. This wasn't charity. It was justice. Noah was growing fast. He had this wild curiosity, the kind that made you realize how much magic still existed in the world. If only you remembered to look down. Every new object fascinated him. He'd touch it, turn it over in his hands, taste it if we weren't fast enough. He loved music more than anything. The moment he heard a melody, even from a commercial, he'd freeze, eyes wide, then start to sway with that drunken toddler grace. Sophia taught him to clap along to lullabies. I bought a digital keyboard just to play him Twinkle Twinkle. I was awful at it, but he didn't care. He'd sit next to me, hitting random keys and laughing like we were performing at Carnegie Hall. Sometimes, I wondered if that love of music meant something, a sign, a thread tied to his past, to where he came from. It haunted me in quiet moments. Who had held him before I did? Had anyone sung to him? Was there a lullaby buried somewhere in his memory, waiting to be recognized? Still, I didn't dwell on it long. We were here now. We had each other, and that had to be enough. One night, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and baby food flung across the kitchen like confetti, I lay on the nursery floor beside Noah's crib. He was asleep, clutching his stuffed elephant, the same one I'd grabbed on impulse the first day we came home together. I stared up at the ceiling, thinking about the board meeting that morning. My CFO, a very polished and painfully pragmatic woman named Dana, had tried to stage an intervention. "Your public image is shifting," she said bluntly. "You're becoming less predictable. Investors are unsure of your priorities." "My priority," I told her without blinking, "is asleep in the next room." Her lips pursed like I'd told her I was starting a llama farm. She continued, "We're in a critical growth phase, Ethan. Latin America, the crypto platform launch. We're still up 30% year over year," I reminded her. "Maybe spend less time worrying about my diapers and more time managing your spreadsheets." That didn't go over well, but I didn't care. I'd built that company from nothing. I'd carried it through 2 recessions. They could manage a few boardroom tantrums while I raised a toddler. After all, I wasn't trying to be a mogul anymore. I was trying to be a man Noah could look up to, and maybe, just maybe, a man I could be proud of too. When the foundation's first building finally opened, I brought Noah to the ceremony. He wore a tiny suit and bow tie, completely unbothered by the reporters and cameras. He sat on my hip while I gave my speech, his chubby hand patting the mic like he wanted to speak next. I told the crowd, when I found Noah, I thought I was saving him. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't know, was that he would end up saving me. There were tears, applause, a few skeptical faces, but most were moved. And afterward, as people congratulated me, Noah fell asleep against my chest. I remember holding him close, rocking slightly, and thinking this was the moment I'd been building toward all my life. Not the IPOs, not the headlines, not the penthouse view of the world from above. This quiet weight of love, sleeping in my arms, was the only success that truly mattered. It was Noah's 3rd birthday when the phone call came. The kind of call that stops time, shatters the rhythm of your life, and leaves everything trembling in its wake. The celebration had been small but meaningful. We hosted it at the Noah Foundation's main hall, now transformed into a bright, joyful space filled with balloons, soft music, and laughter from the children we'd taken in. Noah wore a birthday crown made of paper and glitter. He danced, he giggled, he smeared cake across his face like it was war paint. He was healthy, happy, thriving. And I, watching from the sidelines with a camera in one hand and a heart so full it ached, thought we had finally found our rhythm. Then Rachel, my longtime assistant, found me by the doors. Her usually composed expression had slipped into something else. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. She handed me my phone and whispered, "It's the hospital. They need to speak with you, urgently." My heart stuttered. I stepped into the hallway, my ears still catching the echo of Noah's laughter from inside. On the other end of the line was a doctor from St. Agnes Memorial Hospital. A woman had been brought in after a car accident, severe but stable. Among her belongings were photographs of a child, of Noah. "She's been asking for her son," the doctor said gently, "and based on what we found, we believe she may be his biological mother." The breath left my lungs. I stared at the wall in front of me, unseeing. Her name was Claire Bennett. I didn't remember moving, but somehow I was in the car 10 minutes later, Lauren beside me, holding my hand like we were 10 years old again, bracing for the next house, the next family, the next goodbye. The hospital was a blur of sterile corridors and hushed voices. The doctor met us at the entrance to the ICU. He was kind but clinical. Multiple fractures, concussion. She'll recover physically, but the psychological trauma, she's been repeating the same phrase, "Where's my son? Find my son." I nodded, numb. "Can I see her?" He led me to the room. Inside, surrounded by machines and the soft beeping of monitors, lay a woman with dark hair tangled against her pillow. Her face was pale, marked with bruises and stitches, but beneath the pain I could see something else. grace, fragility, beauty. And then her eyes opened, blue, deep, searching. She looked at me like she'd known me forever. "You found him," she whispered. "Not a question, a certainty." I sat in the chair beside her, barely breathing. "His name is Noah." Tears spilled down her temples, unnoticed. "I called him Caleb. I used to sing to him every night. I never thought I'd see him again." Over the next few days, Claire's story came out in pieces, raw, unraveling, too painful to say all at once. She'd been a renowned pianist, performing across the country, her career blossoming. But behind the curtain was a man, her former manager, a powerful figure in the industry who became controlling, violent when she tried to leave. When she became pregnant, he grew more unstable. And when Noah was born, he saw the baby not as a child, but a way out of his gambling debts. "He was going to sell our son," she said quietly one afternoon as we sat on the hospital's rooftop garden. I overheard him. That night I ran. I took only what I could carry. But he found us. He beat me. When I woke up, Caleb was gone. They told me I had postpartum psychosis, that I'd imagined it all. No one believed me. Her hands trembled in her lap. I wanted to reach for them, but didn't. She looked at me then, with eyes that carried the weight of 3 years of searching. "And now, you're his father," I nodded slowly. "I've raised him since the night I found him in that alley. I never meant to leave him, I swear." "I know." There was silence, filled only by the wind moving through the trees, and then she said the one thing I wasn't ready for. "I want to meet him." I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. Because a part of me wanted to protect Noah fiercely, to keep him away from confusion, from pain, from anything that might unsettle the little life we had built so carefully. But another part of me, the part that remembered being a boy passed from house to house, wondering why no one ever stayed, knew I couldn't deny her that. A week later, we arranged a supervised visit. Lauren agreed to mediate. Sophia helped explain to Noah, in the simplest way possible, that a special friend of Daddy's was coming to meet him. He didn't understand, of course, not the depth of it, but he was curious, always open-hearted. The meeting took place in our garden, where sun filtered through the trees and bird song softened the air. Claire arrived on crutches, her steps slow, her posture unsure. She froze when she saw Noah playing near the fountain, his toy airplane clutched in one hand. I saw her lips part, her breath catch. "He has your eyes," I said quietly. Noah turned and looked at her. Just looked. His head tilted, curious. He walked toward her slowly, the way children do when they sense something important is about to happen. Claire crouched, pain tightening her face, but she smiled. "Hi, Noah," she said gently. "I'm Claire." He stared at her for a long moment, then pointed at the piano visible through the sunroom window. "Do you know how to play music?" Surprised. "Yes, I do." "I like music," he said. "Want to play?" She looked up at me, tears in her eyes. I nodded. We moved inside. She sat at the piano, hands trembling slightly over the keys. She closed her eyes and began to play, a soft, delicate lullaby. And then Noah did something that made the air disappear from my lungs. He began to hum along. The same tune, note for note, as if it had always been inside him. Claire's hand stopped. She looked at him, then at me, and finally back at him. "That's a song I used to play when I was pregnant," she whispered. "Every night." And in that instant, something unspoken passed between them, something older than memory. A bond not broken, just waiting. I watched them, mother and son, and felt the ground shift beneath my feet. What came next I didn't know. But one thing was clear. The past had found us, and none of us would ever be the same. After that day in the garden, nothing in our lives remained quite the same. Something invisible had shifted, like a puzzle piece had been turned over and finally clicked into place. But with that click came a heavy silence. I could feel it in every breath Claire took, in every cautious step she made around Noah, in the way I started watching both of them when they were in the same room, as if I was waiting for something to go wrong. She didn't push. That was the first thing I noticed about her. Claire didn't demand time. She didn't declare herself his mother or try to force a bond. She simply showed up. Some days she came to the foundation, sat at the far end of the room during music hour, and watched Noah from behind a stack of art projects. Other times, she offered to help fold laundry, read to the toddlers, or talk with the older kids. She never used the time to insert herself. She let things unfold, and I respected her for that. Noah, for his part, was fascinated. Not confused, not scared, just curious. He didn't understand who Claire was, not yet, but he liked her. He gravitated toward her gentle voice, the way she crouched to his level when she spoke, how she never rushed his answers. And most of all, he was mesmerized when she played the piano. He'd sit beside her on the bench, legs too short to reach the floor, and mimic her movements. He couldn't read music, of course, but he copied the rhythm of her fingers with astonishing precision. His tiny hands followed hers like shadows. And Claire watched him with a kind of awe I hadn't seen in anyone before, not even in myself. One afternoon I found them in the music room together. She was teaching him a soft melody, guiding his fingers across the keys. The light from the windows spilled across the floor like honey, and Noah laughed when he hit the wrong note. Claire didn't correct him. She smiled, played the wrong note herself, and said, "See, even I make mistakes." Later that night, after Noah had gone to bed, I stood on the balcony of the mansion, staring out into the dark, trying to understand the quiet war inside me. She was his mother, and I was his father, and somehow we were both right. The question that haunted me wasn't about biology. It was about belonging. Would she want him back? Would a court see her as more rightful, more worthy, just because she shared his blood? Would she try to undo everything we had built? I couldn't bear the thought of losing him. But I also couldn't ignore the truth in Claire's eyes when she looked at him. The fierce, aching love of someone who had lost and searched and hoped for far too long. It came to a head one evening in the library, where she found me staring blankly at the fire. "I know what you're afraid of," she said quietly. I didn't answer. "I'm not here to take him from you, Ethan." I looked up, met her gaze. "How can you say that? You're his mother. You have every right." She stepped closer, but not too close, always respectful of my space. "You saved his life. You raised him. He knows you. He loves you. I could never take that away. I wouldn't want to." I swallowed hard. My throat was tight. "But you want to be part of his life." "Yes," she said, her voice steady, "if you'll let me." We stood there for a long moment, just breathing. "Then let's figure it out," I said finally. "Together." From that point on, something new began, a slow, careful building of a shared space between us. We didn't define it, we didn't rush it, but day by day, moment by moment, we began to parent side by side. It started with simple things. She began staying for dinner once a week. Noah would help her set the table, proudly placing forks in all the wrong spots. She taught him how to crack eggs, and he taught her the names of all the Foundation's rescue dogs. They read books together, sang lullabies together. He started calling her Miss Claire. She never corrected him. But one night, as she tucked him in after a bedtime story, he looked up at her with those serious eyes of his and asked, "Were you the one who sang me this sleepy song in my dreams?" Claire froze. I watched from the hallway, my heart thudding. "I don't know," she said softly, brushing his hair back. "Maybe." "I think it was you," he whispered. "It feels like you." She bent down, kissed his forehead, and whispered back, "It feels like you, too." When she left that night, I walked her to her car. "He remembers," she said quietly, hands trembling as she fumbled for her keys. "He doesn't understand how, but he remembers." "He always hummed that song," I told her. "Even before he could speak. I thought he'd picked it up from a show or something." Claire smiled through her tears. "I wrote it for him. When I was pregnant, I used to play it every night." We stood in silence for a moment before she looked at me. "Do you think," she asked slowly, "do you think there's space for all of us? Not just you and me as co-parents, but as something more?" I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure. I was still learning how to share a son. I didn't know how to share my heart. But I knew one thing for sure. We had already started building something. Maybe not romantic yet, maybe not permanent, but it was real. It was rooted in love, not just for Noah, but for the people we were becoming because of him. I nodded slowly. "Let's find out." And from that night on, Claire didn't feel like a visitor anymore. She felt like something closer to home. Claire became a fixture in our lives, not suddenly, but in that quiet, graceful way she had of slipping into the background and slowly becoming the center of it all. One morning, I looked up from my coffee and realized she was already in the kitchen with Noah, helping him peel a banana. She was laughing, really laughing, and Noah was making up a ridiculous song about banana shoes, and suddenly the house didn't feel so big anymore. It felt warm, lived in, alive. We never made a formal decision. There was no sit-down conversation, no defining moment where we declared a new arrangement. She simply began staying longer. Weekends turned into weekdays, afternoons turned into dinners. And before I knew it, I had installed a second piano in the music room, this one just her size, with soft pedals and perfect acoustics, because Noah liked to sit between our two pianos and pretend he was conducting an orchestra. The foundation was thriving, but more than that, it was transforming. It had started as a safe place, a shelter, a space for healing, but under Claire's influence, it became a home of rhythm and melody. She introduced music programs, trained staff in music therapy, and transformed an unused wing into a creative arts space that buzzed with energy. Children who hadn't spoken in weeks suddenly sang. Others, once guarded and quiet, started pounding rhythms on drums or composing little tunes on xylophones. It was magic, the kind that came not from money or strategy, but from someone who understood what it meant to have a voice stolen and then slowly reclaimed through sound. One afternoon, while watching Noah guide a group of toddlers through a clapping game, Claire leaned over and said, "He's going to change lives one day." I smiled. "He already has." She turned to look at me then, and there was something in her eyes. Gratitude, maybe? Or something deeper. "You never asked me to earn a place here. You just gave it." "I didn't give you anything," I said, honest. "You claimed it. You built it with us." And that was the truth. Whatever we were becoming, whatever name it would eventually wear, it was real. Claire and I were building something on the foundation of shared love for a boy who had, without meaning to, taught us both how to breathe again. At night, when the world slowed down, Claire often stayed to play. She'd settle at the grand piano in the west wing of the mansion, and her fingers would dance lightly, filling the halls with lullabies, classical riffs, even jazz, whatever suited her mood. Sometimes I'd find her there alone, playing to no one but herself, eyes closed, lost in the sound. Other times, Noah would join her, fingers clumsy and proud, grinning every time he got a note right. I watched them with something that felt dangerously close to awe. She was gentle, but not fragile, strong, but never hard. With every passing week, she peeled away my armor without even trying. One night, I found her asleep in the reading nook, Noah curled against her side, a storybook fallen between them. The fire had gone low, the whole house was still, and for the first time since I'd carried Noah home from that alley, I let myself imagine forever. But forever is a dangerous thought when you've built a life on caution. I still had doubts, ghosts, fears that whispered I didn't deserve this happiness. That one day she might decide to leave and take the music with her. That Noah would wake up and want something I couldn't be. Mike picked up on it. He visited more often now, partly to check in, partly to see the changes for himself. One night, while sipping a whiskey on my balcony, he gave me that look, half smug, half sincere. "You're in love with her," he said, no preamble. I didn't argue. I didn't deny it. I just stared at the skyline and said, "I don't know how to do this." "Yes, you do," he replied. "You've already been doing it for months. The only difference is admitting it to yourself." He left the next morning, but his words stayed. And they echoed louder a week later, when Claire walked into my office at the foundation and shut the door behind her. Her hands were fidgeting. Her smile was tentative. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Okay." "I was offered a position at the Juilliard Extension in New York, teaching piano to gifted youth. It's a 2-year contract." I froze. The air left the room. "I see." She stepped closer. "I haven't accepted. I wanted to talk to you first." I swallowed. "What do you want, Claire?" She looked down, then back up, eyes glistening. "I want to stay, but I can't do that if I don't know what we are, what we're becoming." For a moment, all the noise in my head quieted, all the doubts, all the fears. I crossed the room, took her hand in mine, and said the one truth I'd been circling for weeks. "You're not just Noah's mother anymore. You're part of us. You're part of me. And if you'll stay, not because you're scared to go, but because you want to stay, I'll build a world around you." She didn't cry. She smiled, and she stayed. The days that followed were lighter. We no longer tiptoed around what we felt. She began sleeping in the guest room less and in my bed more. We laughed more, argued occasionally over silly things, how much screen time Noah should get, whether pizza counted as a balanced dinner, but always ended the day with music, quiet hands intertwined, the piano filling the space between breaths. And Noah, sweet, intuitive Noah, blossomed in the presence of two people who finally found each other, not in the bright noise of youth, but in the soft miracle of second chances. We were learning to be a family. Not the kind built by blood alone, but the kind that chose each other, again and again, with open hearts and quiet faith. And that choice, every day, felt like the truest kind of love. Spring came late that year, as if the earth had been holding its breath with the rest of us. But when it arrived, it came all at once. Soft green budding in the trees, sunlight stretching longer across the lawn, and the air warming just enough to invite the windows open again. It felt like the house itself sighed with relief. We had found a rhythm. Not perfect, God knows, not without its bumps, but it was ours. Mornings were filled with small rituals. Claire making French toast while Noah tried to sneak the powdered sugar jar off the counter, me pretending not to notice as I packed his tiny backpack for preschool. Evenings were piano notes and bubble baths, bedtime stories told by two voices instead of one. Sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night and just watch them breathe, one curled into the other. And I would feel it again, this quiet, grounding peace. A life I never thought I'd earn. But even in peace, life doesn't stop moving, and sometimes it brings you full circle. The foundation had been preparing for its first spring recital. A public event, the biggest we'd hosted yet. It would feature performances from the children, songs they'd written, dances they'd practiced in the sunlit rooms Claire had designed. She'd been working tirelessly with them, her passion contagious, her kindness steady. But one afternoon, I found her standing in the new music wing, staring at a flyer. It was a poster someone had made for the event. At the center, a photo of Claire at the piano, Noah leaning into her side, both of them mid-laugh. Above the image, in bold serif letters, Noah's song, a spring celebration of music, healing, and family. She touched the photo gently. It still feels like a dream sometimes. What does? That he's here, that I get to play music again, that you let me in. I stepped behind her, wrapping my arms around her waist. It wasn't about letting you in, Claire. It was about realizing you were already part of us, from the beginning. She turned to face me, eyes glimmering. You know what he called me last night? I smiled. Tell me. We were folding laundry together. Well, he was mostly unfolding it, and he handed me a sock and said, "Here you go, Mommy," just like that, like it had always been true. The air caught in my chest. I didn't correct him, she added, barely whispering. I couldn't. You never have to. The recital came on a bright Sunday afternoon. We held it in the Foundation's brand new auditorium, a space built with rich wood acoustics and soft lighting. Every seat was filled. Donors, families, children, volunteers. It was a full house, and yet somehow, as I stood backstage with Noah in his tiny tuxedo and Claire adjusting the mic stand, it all felt intimate, like a living room. I'd given a short welcome speech, thanking everyone for believing in something that began as a single act of instinct on a cold night. And then the performances began. Children sang, danced, played recorders, recited poetry. There were off-key notes and forgotten lines and bursts of laughter, and every moment was perfect. Then came the final act. Claire walked on stage alone first, taking her seat at the grand piano in the center. The lights dimmed and a hush fell. She played the opening bars of a lullaby, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. Some recognized it, others just felt it. I knew it like my own heartbeat. It was the song, the one she had written for Noah before he was born, the one he hummed before he could talk, the one that brought them back to each other. And then, from the wings, Noah walked out. He didn't hesitate. He walked with the calm confidence of someone stepping into his place in the world. He sat beside her on the bench, his feet swinging freely, his small hands ready. They played together. It wasn't flawless. He hit a few wrong notes. Claire covered them without blinking, and when they reached the last verse, he sang. Soft, clear, true. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. I stood from my seat without realizing it, applauding, cheering, crying. And then Claire looked out at me and gave the slightest nod. She rose from the piano, lifted Noah into her arms, and together they walked to the center of the stage. She whispered something in his ear. He giggled, then darted to the wings, leaving her alone under the lights. That's when she reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a small black box. I blinked. Was this happening? She smiled at the audience, then turned toward the seats. "Ethan," she said, voice steady but shining with emotion. "3 years ago, you found a baby in the dark. You saved him. You gave him your name, your love, your home. But more than that, you gave him music. You gave him family." My breath caught. "What you didn't know was that you were also saving me. You brought me back to life. You taught me that love isn't just something that happens once. It's something you choose. Every day, and I choose you." She opened the box. Inside wasn't a ring. It was a piano key, old, slightly worn. The same one she'd carried from the first piano she ever played. I remembered her telling me once that she kept it as a symbol, a promise to herself. "I want to play this song with you," she said, her voice trembling now. "For the rest of our lives. Will you marry me?" The crowd erupted. I stumbled down the aisle, half laughing, half crying, my heart bursting. When I reached the stage, she took my hand. "Claire," I whispered, my voice rough. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." We didn't kiss right away. We just stood there, forehead to forehead, soaking in the wild, beautiful truth of it all. Noah returned, running between us, arms wide. We scooped him up, all 3 of us tangled in a hug, music still echoing in the background. Later that night, after the guests had gone, after the hall had emptied and the stars had come out, the 3 of us sat beneath the lights on that stage. Noah curled between us, humming softly. Claire leaned her head on my shoulder. "Did you ever imagine it would end like this?" I looked down at the boy in our arms. "No," I said, "but I think it didn't end. I think this is the beginning." And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to go wrong. I just felt home. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this heartfelt story. If you're still here, it means the journey of Ethan, Claire, and little Noah touched you the way it touched us while bringing it to life. This isn't just a story about a billionaire or a lost child. It's a story about second chances, about how love often finds us in the most unexpected ways, sometimes in an alley, sometimes through music, and sometimes when we think we've already missed our moment. It reminds us that family isn't always who we're born to, but who we choose to build our lives with. Let this be a reminder that healing takes time, that people can change, and that joy often waits just beyond our greatest fears. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below and connect with our growing family of listeners. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss a new story. Every day, we bring you real and powerful tales of love, hope, and redemption. Until next time, take care and believe in new beginnings.